Good evening. I'm Jerry Mitchell, and with the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, we are welcome to MCIR Live. We're so excited to have just a great program tonight. We first want to thank our sponsors, which include Mississippi Book Festival, Lemuria Bookstore, which Mr. Trillin is very familiar with, and of course, Millsaps College, the place where MCIR offices are, which we're very excited to have them with us at all, kind of a permanent partner of ours. But if you have a question tonight, do put it in the chat box, and we will get to those, and you can try to answer your questions. But it is such an honor tonight to have two of America's finest writers and thinkers, I believe. Johnny Cobb and Calvin Trillin are both writers for the New Yorker, but they're, of course, so much more than that. Dr. Cobb is also a professor of journalism at Columbia University, and also the Ira Lipman Center, is the director of the Ira Lipman Center for Journalism and Civil and Human Rights. And he's also a regular contributor to Frontline, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is obviously, one of the premier programs on PBS. And then, of course, Calvin Trillin, just one of my absolute favorite humorists and writers, and just fantastic. And it's such an honor to have both of them with us tonight. And I think my favorite quote about you, Mr. Trillin, is that you're the Charlie Chaplin of food writers. So I think that's pretty high praise. I like that. But it's great to have you with us. We're going to start off with Mr. Trillin. Dr. Cobb's going to be with us shortly. He just got delayed, so he'll be with us in just a minute. But it seems, appropriate tonight, given these two writers have been working for decades to get us to examine our notions about race, that would be appropriate tonight to talk about race in America. And here we are just a day after the historic inauguration of the first Black woman as vice president. And of course, 2 months after the nation elected a record number of women of color to Congress. And of course, here we are 8 months now after George Floyd's death just kind of began to force this nation to kind of begin to re-examine its thoughts about race and the treatment of people of color. So I want to start off with you, Mr. Trillin. I love your book, Jackson 1964, by the way. This is
Thank you.
Which is a collection, if you're not familiar with it, it's a collection of his reporting on race for a half century. And but of course, the one close to my heart was the one you did on the Sovereignty Commission, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was, for those who aren't familiar with the Sovereignty Commission, kind of a state segregationist spy agency. And, one of the most telling details I thought with, and you can talk about it, was where the Sovereignty Commission investigators, there's a white woman that's rumored to have the father being Black, and what
Right.
the investigators did in that case, if you happen to remember that.
I do, because the small matters of investigation for the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission always interested me even more than the large and rather dangerous
Right.
occupation they had. This was a woman, I can't remember the name of the town, but
Renata, I think it was
Renata, yeah. She was rumored to have given birth to this child from a Black father. And so the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission sent an investigator out to find out. And I think he went out there with maybe one more. I could imagine them inspecting the kids in the crib and these two investigators who I picture them. I don't know if this was true. To have sort of a sheriff's belly, and they're ruminating about what this kid might be, and someone finally decided, look at his fingernails. And when I was a boy in Missouri, it was said by children. I mean, I don't think any grown-ups believe this, that you could tell whether a person had black blood, as they said, by looking at his fingernails, whether he had little half moons on his fingernails. I can't remember which way it went, um, but that was an article of faith in second grade. Of course, we also believed that the Japanese had yellow blood, so it wasn't.
Yeah, not like it's true, right?
No, not as if it was scientific, but the fingernails were too small because it's just a little bitty baby. So they decided, in a kind of a, I noticed that President Biden talked a lot about compromise today.
Right.
Yesterday, they compromised. They decided the father was Italian. That was the best they could do. Somebody referred to the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission as corn pone Stasi. It was sort of like the, and yeah, it did seem Keystone Cop, except that was pretty serious.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it's easy for us to think of it as Keystone
Yeah.
Cops today, but you tell me, what was Mississippi like back in 63, 64 we're talking about?
Well,
If you happen to
when
not
I
put it that way.
when I reported a story in Mississippi, I was when I walked down the street in Jackson, people would say hello to me. It was probably just kind of Southern friendliness, but I thought, wait a minute, I don't know that person. There's a kind of a tension about it. And when I interviewed the mayor of Jackson once, um, and actually local reporters came to cover the interview.
Mhm.
So I was with Time then, and they said, so a Time reporters asked the mayor yesterday or something, and if I did a story in the southern part of the state, I would go file my story in New Orleans.
Oh, in New Orleans.
And in the northern part of the state, I'd go to Memphis.
Memphis.
And then I'd call my office and I'd say, I've slipped over the border.
Yeah, I like that line. You had that in the book, I think, what about when I was in Mississippi in those days, about I may have had thoughts of slipping over the border, but I was in my country the whole time. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was, on the other hand, I think I felt, I felt a little more uneasy about physical danger in Alabama in some ways, because Mississippi was almost a police state then. And if somebody told you, I mean, if it was said you weren't supposed to hurt anybody, of course, that's not true of those Freedom Riders who got, I mean, the 64 kids who got killed. But I felt that Alabama was sort of gangs of warring thugs, and Mississippi was a little more under control. But it was still, it was tense, I think, in those days. And I was actually in the newspaper, or I guess it's the sister newspaper or something, where you managed years later to expose all of the people who hadn't been brought to trial. I would go in there, but I was wary about going in there. And there was one particular columnist, can't think of his name, but there was something sort of nasty and more than just segregationist, but sort of.
Oh, you're talking about some of the ones that wrote back then? Oh
Yeah.
When you had Jimmy Ward from the Jackson Daily News, kind of had a bit of a reputation.
Jimmy Ward was there. I think that's the one. His column went down the left side of the paper. Yeah.
He was the one that referred to civil rights activists as chimpanzees and,
yes.
other choice language like that.
On the other hand, the first federal judge, I think, that the Kennedys appointed in the South said words like that from the federal bench.
Judge Cox.
Yes.
Carol Cox.
And yeah, it's odd now when you think about it that the things have gone kind of back and forth and back and forth. That the um, the federal judges in the South who made desegregation possible were mainly Republicans,
Mm.
um, and they were Republicans because there wasn't any Republican senator to go past and they were the sort of Republicans who were Republicans because either they happened to come from hill counties that didn't even want to secede, or they were business guys who would come to the southeastern branch office or something.
Right.
But I think I said in one of those books that somebody from Mars traveling in the South who judged things only by the judges would think that the Republicans were the party of Lincoln.
That's wild.
But in fact, they were.
Interesting. Um, well, you wrote about back in even in the 70s. You're writing about kind of deadly force by police.
Yeah, there's one of the pieces in that book is about a killing in Seattle. A black suspect and a white cop, or maybe more than one white cop, I can't remember. And a lot of people, when the book came out, mentioned that was in 1975. That could have happened last week.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things did not change at all, and including that part of the one big difference when I started writing about this was that in the 60s, race and segregation were thought of as a regional problem.
Right.
It was the South, and it was thought of as your opinion followed the geography.
Right.
If you were from Alabama, you were a segregationist, and if you were not, and so and many people, well, the Kennedy administration really thought of segregation in the South partly as a problem for foreign relations. Didn't look good, and there was during the Cold War. I remember there was a joke where the in-tourist guide is showing the subway system in Moscow, and the station is gorgeous, and it's got chandeliers and television sets and everything. And the American says, "But there are no trains." And the Russian says, "What about lynchings in the South?" I mean that's the answer. And so because of that, a lot of people in the South, a lot of white people in the South, not white people who weren't necessarily sort of crazy racists, but sort of believed that Black people in the South were basically happy unless they were stirred up by outside agitators. And among the outside agitators were reporters. So, so if you got stopped because you didn't stay at a stop sign long enough, even if you got out of the car and kicked the tires and got back in, um, the first question was always, "Where are you from?" And "I work out of the Atlanta bureau" was not considered a good answer at all. Um, I, 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 I think I got to Missouri at some point, but I never got up to what would have been the proper answer, which was, "Oh, up around Jackson County, Missouri." I didn't have the nerve to say that, but if you were, at least I wasn't from New York, the center of evil, where some foreign-looking gentleman had planned all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was the thing. I remember the famous Claude Sitton, famous Claude Sitton memorial notebook,
That's right. He took that notebook from can't remember the name. It was somewhere in North Carolina. Somebody made that notebook, and he took him to Ivan Allen, who later became mayor of Atlanta, and had him cut down so you could fit them in your back pocket without. And people were particularly, I think the brave people were photographers, because we shared an office with Life in Atlanta, and there was a Life photographer named Donald Urbrock who was in that office, and I always told him, Donald, if we're in one of those situations, at best I don't know you. At worst, I've been one of the people chasing you. And sure enough, at the bus station in Montgomery, when we were the Freedom Riders and the press were greeted, I think, as we were making our way out, still being followed by the crowd, Don Urbach, who had been knocked down and said, don't hurt my camera, here's the film. And had given them the film. It turned out he had given them a dummy film that he carried around, and he just handed it to me on the way out and said, put this in your pocket. So he was indeed brave, and I wouldn't have chased him exactly. I mean,
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. I would have kind of melted into the crowd.
That was the time. That was pretty scary. I mean, that was a pretty scary sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that was also when John Lewis and some other freedom riders got beaten.
Yes. Yeah. They first went after the press. This was way after the White House and the governor's office had talked. Everything's supposedly arranged, but the police sort of melted away as we got to Montgomery.
Imagine that. I'm so shocked.
I knew that would startle you, Jerry, from your experience. And they went after the press first. We were actually sort of saved by, there was a guy who suddenly said, in a moment when we were sort of backing up down the parking lot, he said, let's get him out of here. And I think that the people who were after us didn't know who he was, whether he was an FBI guy or what. And he threw us into a cab. And it turned out he was a reporter from the Montgomery Advertiser who had left to go to a paper in Florida and had come back to visit some friends and just took charge and definitely saved us. And I think went to the Montgomery Advertisers in the cab. Although who knows, you know, as you walk through one of those papers, you walk through where the printers were, and you think, was that guy chasing me last night? He looks kind of familiar. I don't know.
Well, that was also the one where John Siegenthaler from the Justice Department was.
Yes. Yeah. John Siegenthaler was there, and there was another guy who later went to Yale Law School. Anyway, yes, the FBI was they were there, but that's where the freedom ride stopped for a few days while these various negotiations were going on. And there was a big mass meeting at a church, and there was a lot of fear that the people were going to come into the church, but again, an agent who didn't really have any training in this sort of took charge and kept the crowd out. So we were lucky, and I was not injured at all in any of these things.
Yeah, you were fortunate. So anyway, very fortunate.
I did have an expense account item once saying trousers ruined in racial disturbance. I can't remember how much I asked for that, but they weren't very expensive.
Well, anyway, was going to ask you about, does yesterday's inauguration change anything?
I don't know. I don't know how many times I've heard that things are now going to change. Um, I have to say it's a great relief to have um, the person who will not be named get on the plane to uh, Palm Beach, and as the English would say, I was glad to see the back of him. And I think that's changed. I do think it makes a difference um, what somebody like the president says about these things, and whether he really says it because he means it. And I think Biden is one of those people. Um, I and I don't know. There's so many aspects to it. I mean, the whole housing and real estate and schools and all this intertwined um, to change the way of and to change people's views. I think that's changing slightly. Um, you have to remember 30 or 40 years ago, segregation was not just something that people practiced and weren't very proud of. It was the law in these places. I mean, you had to, with the law in Georgia was segregation, um, and so we've come a long way from since then, but I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I was going to talk maybe about the Mississippi flag, which is kind of interesting to me,
Mhm.
which is uh, basically that, I'm sure you heard the news that the flag actually changed, which might have
Yeah.
shocked you. I don't know, but anyway, um, but yeah, it's, and the people who long supported, keeping the flag with the Confederate symbol, which was really actually adopted later, not after the Civil War, but after Reconstruction and
Right.
all of that. Um, and so, but the constant thing they would say is, change the hearts instead of the flag or something like that, which I found very fascinating. Um, we've changed the flag now. Can we
Well,
change hearts? Is that
I
possible?
think I think changing the flag is a way to start changing the heart. Um, Eisenhower had a phrase: uh, "You can't legislate morality." That was his excuse for not doing much about racism. Well, in the first place, the government legislates morality all the time. I mean, the divorce laws are legislating morality, but also you can legislate behavior, and I think, um, and somehow over the years, certainly when I was in grade school, uh, Robert E. Lee was considered a hero, a person of principle who who may not have believed in slavery, which in fact he did believe in slavery and had slaves. Um, and I think people then thought that then they argued that the Civil War was about states' rights and about, but the historians, it's really simple stuff. The I wrote something the other day and I mentioned about Robert E. Lee and what would have happened if Robert E. Lee had sort of exhausted the patience of the North and they finally said, "Oh hell, go ahead and secede." Then there'd be, instead of the last remaining superpower, there'd be two ordinary countries, one of which still practiced slavery. I mean, when we think about it, they what would have stopped them? Um, so I think, and then you have to figure out how Black people feel walking by that flag or having the flag thing.
I've heard.
And there was a Black comedian, I can't remember his name, Jared Carmichael, I think, something like that, who said something I thought was very wise. He said, being Black in America is exhausting. And I think that's right. I think because you never know what's going to come up. Um, and I
Yeah, it's
think,
like,
I,
well, it's like in New York, and you think, well, it's the South, but what happened in New York the other day, or not terribly long ago, where the bird watcher,
oh, exactly. Yeah.
the woman, Jelani, Dr. Cobb wrote about that, about the,
Yeah. It was, his behavior was remarkable because he actually said that she shouldn't really suffer all these things. I mean, he more or less forgave her. It's as the people in the church in Charleston forgave the wacko thing.
go figure
But
that.
forgiveness seems to be up to Black people rather than white people.
Apparently so. It's fascinating, you know. Um, and so what do you observe nationally? I mean, obviously we talk about race, but it's more than just white and Black as well. I mean, you're talking about obviously a rise in Hispanic population and
Right.
Asian population and other people of color.
Yeah, I was surprised to see during those Georgia races the question of which way the Asian vote was going to go in Georgia. I mean, that certainly wasn't around. I mean, I guess the Chinese in Mississippi were always there running the grocery stores, but I didn't know about Georgians in Mississippi. Um, well, I think that one of the changes, and a huge change in the country, was the Immigration Act of 1965. Um, and I think it's the uh, sort of unpredictable consequences of something. I don't think they had that in mind when they passed it. And I looked it up once in the Times, and it barely made the front page when Lyndon Johnson signed it. And the first paragraph talked about Cubans and things. I mean, so it really transformed the country. And now the country, I think one of the things that powers this sort of wacko version of the right wing um, is that they feel the country is being taken over by dark people rather than white people, and they remember the one of the chants in Charlottesville was "the Jews will not replace us," which is really weird. I thought that somebody who didn't hear well would think it was "the juice will not disgrace us." It was an O.J. Simpson thing, but it wasn't. It was "the Jews will not replace us." Well, this goes back to a theory that this guy in France has. His name is Camus, but he's not the Camus you read in high school. He's a different Camus. Who talks about replacement, the replacement of a white country becomes a Black country. And I think this is part of what powers, not all of it, but it's part of what powers those people who were in the Capitol the other day. That they're losing out on this sort of idealized America, which only existed, of course, for white people. And it's becoming another country. I mean, to me, I have kind of the opposite feeling: is that it's a much more interesting country because of this. And also, the other day I was watching one interviews about the COVID pandemic, and I realized the people they interview, the epidemiologists, the nurses, and all these frontline people, they are the same color as the people that they were trying to keep out of the country. I mean, this is an infectious disease specialist from South India. This is a nurse from the Philippines or from Jamaica. Um, the and but these people see them as a threat. I think as an existential threat that it won't be the white guy's country anymore. Uh, which I say, fine, food will be better, everything will be better, it'll be fine.
Yeah, well, it's that's an interesting observation. I mean, but but it seems like there's been um, in more recent years this permission, for lack of a better term, to begin to air some of these things that maybe in the past people wouldn't say.
Right.
You know, um, that racism can be more blatant, if that, for lack of a better term. Anyway, what do you see?
Yeah, it was pretty blatant in the past.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. If you go
um,
more recent past.
yeah. I think also, that they always have theories. One of the things I was wondering about the QAnon theory, why do they have to make it so wacko? I mean, why do they need Satan worshippers and pedophiles? Wouldn't it be enough to have the secret government thing? I mean, I think, what is that? It seems like they made it harder to swallow, but I guess not. I I, yeah, I think there are more people who are in that particular crowd, the ones you saw on television. Um, they're willing to say, we always had those in a way. We always had the Klan and um, when I with the University of Georgia desegregation, there was rumors where these kids were outside of Charlene Hunter's dormitory, that the Klan was going to show up, but the frat boys called it Tri Kappa, which I thought was very good.
Tri Kappa.
There they are.
So, so are you seeing some positive things with regard to race over the past, decade or so? I mean, what would you point to? Are there things that you would point to as maybe
Oh
some
yeah,
positive?
I think more than a few. I think in the first place, the idea of the word now is diversity, which you didn't hear much anymore. But that people um, no longer can sort of ignore the fact that there are no people of color in positions of authority. And it's true. When I went to college in the East, um, there were maybe 1,000 people in my class, and there were 4 black guys. Um, this is Northeast. Uh, there were, I think, 2 Asians. Um, one of them was called Robert Yi Lee, I remember. Um, and that you can't get away with that stuff anymore. I mean, I think that's certainly a positive thing. And the general kind of feeling around the country is not for that. It's against that. In the old days when I was first starting reporting, um, it was just, oh, it's the South. It was like an unfortunate but not disabling characteristic. It was sort of like bragging among Texans or something like that. Here they are, and I remember thinking that there in Kansas City, where we would have pointed to the South, but then when I thought about it, Kansas City was essentially segregated.
Right.
It's just that we didn't have the signs, and we didn't have the rhetoric. We
Right.
didn't have anybody talking about the mongrelization of the races or anything like they did in Georgia. But still, you could go to the ballpark, but otherwise, in a restaurant or in a theater or something like that, there were no black people. They had to have their own theaters, their own restaurants, which were called Lincoln, by the way. In Kansas City, it was the Lincoln Theater, and I always said that there are people who grew up in Kansas City who must become adults and still think they're surprised to hear that Lincoln was the president. They thought it meant colored people allowed, because that's what it's called. And if it was a bakery that had bagels, it was called New York. That was the word for Jewish, New York.
New York.
Yeah.
A question from Stephen Kasloff. What do you think should be done by the Senate and Congress with respect to those members who either gave comfort to the rioters and or voted to overturn the election effectively after the riot was over? You have any thoughts on that?
I have to say that I am nearly an absolute believer in the First Amendment, except for PowerPoint, of course. I think people who use PowerPoint should be arrested. And even if you couldn't put them in jail, you could at least knock them around at the station house for a while. But other than that, someone said, do you have something like a system of belief? I said, yeah, I believe in the First Amendment and I fear the evil eye. That's what I believe. I think that the fact that those people were on the floor of the Senate, I think they have to say what they want to say. And I would certainly be, if they want to, people call for their resignation, that's fine. But they have to be able to say what they want to say. So I would not be in favor of booting them out.
The last question, this is from Joanne O'Quinn. How can the New York City public schools continue to be the most segregated school system in the country?
It's amazing. No, it's a scandal. And there's a wonderful podcast that I can't remember who did it. It's called something like Nice White People or something like that. How you could improve the school by getting white people and white kids, because I don't know. There's been a lot of reporting on it. It's not as if it's unknown, but somehow nothing changes.
Well, thanks so much. And it turns out that Dr. Cobb had an emergency, and so I apologize to everybody for that. But we do want to wrap up, respect everybody's time. But thanks so much, everybody, for joining us for this conversation with Calvin Trillin. It just I could talk to you for hours.
Thank you, sir.
Trillin, it's a real pleasure, and I know you probably have some barbecue recommendations for us, but anyway. Is it your favorite place still the one in Kansas City? Is it still operating? Is your favorite barbecue?
Yeah, I haven't been there for a long time, but I have an old loyalty to them. But I'm a Catholic in my taste when it comes to barbecue. I like South Carolina barbecue. I like Texas barbecue.
That's excellent. Good too. Mississippi barbecue is pretty good too. So yeah, but we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and hope you'll come back and join us again. We here at the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting want to bring you more programs like this and more investigative reporting. And our news collaborative, just to let everybody know a little bit about what we're doing, just started a new series called Unsteady Pulse, which is about healthcare access or lack of healthcare access in Mississippi. And so Mississippi is one of a dozen states that has yet to expand Medicaid. So that's obviously some reporting what we're doing about. And obviously investigative reporting is costly, and we would appreciate your tax deductible donations, obviously. So, but thanks for joining us. And obviously we're not just trying to expose problems, but show other possibilities of solutions and things like that. But thank you for joining us on MCIR Live, and thank you, Mr. Trillin, and thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate it.